Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and you're in for a treat today because I'm in for a treat today. We have Cynthia Leal, Massey. Cynthia, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for asking me.
So, Cynthia is a well known, well established author, having written both in the fiction and nonfiction realm. She's written Death of a Texas Ranger, Fire Lilies, The Caballeros of Ruby, Texas, and latest book, Well of Deception. Before we get to that, Cynthia, could you tell us about your journey to becoming a writer?
Sure. I think all writers will tell you that their journey began when they were little, when they were began to read, and that's when I started my journey as a writer. I was always interested. Once I began to read, um, I was always very interested in biographies. So the little elementary school that I went to, did not have a library, but they did have a mobile library that would come once. I think it would come once every 2 weeks or so, and I was always so excited when they came. I would go to the library, and I would immediately gravitate towards the biographies. So the bookmobile would come to the school, and I would gravitate towards the biographies and later on towards mysteries. Also, in those days, this was many years ago, the Scholastic magazine would come probably once every month or so, and my mother would give me $1 and I'd be able to buy two paperbacks. And in those cases, I would usually gravitate towards the mysteries. I loved mysteries then. So that's when it all started. And then as time went on, I found that I was very good in English. I loved to write. I started writing little stories, but it was when I was in high school that I began to understand that I wanted to learn more about other people, so I actually joined the journalism staff, and it was my sophomore year that I got in the journalism staff and the newspaper staff, and I worked my way up and became editor in chief my senior year of our newspaper, and so then that's kind of when I really began my nonfiction writing. I knew that I'm not a poet. I can tell you that I'm not a poet, but I did love to read novels, narrative fiction, narrative nonfiction. Then I got to college, and it was when I was in college that I finally took my first creative writing course. And I think I must have been about a junior at that time. And when that happened, I realized that fiction writing was very different from nonfiction writing. And so I, but I continued. I just said, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to learn how to write fiction because I loved to read novels. And so that's kind of when it all started.
Where'd you go to college?
St. Mary's University in San Antonio. It was a
Okay.
Catholic university, and I got my master's degree there also in English, and took a lot of creative writing courses then as well.
Tell us about your passion for Texas history.
Oh, Texas history. I guess that also started when I was just a kid. Davy Crockett, all of those kinds of things intrigued me. Texas is just got such interesting history, and it's a big state. I mean, it's the history, the fact that it was a republic, its own country, basically. I don't know. Texans have this sort of attitude, and I think I have that. I just think we live in the best state in the country. I just love Texas. I do recall when I was a member of Women Writing the West, and that we have conferences all over the country, or we have had over the years. And I've been in the organization almost 30 years now, come to think of it. So I remember someone telling me that I met at the conference, and the ladies come from all over the country, and well, there's men also in the organization, but they would say, "Oh, we always know the Texas people because they come in kind of with a swagger and like they own the place, and then they don't tell you I'm from this little town in Texas. They just says I'm from Texas. You're from Texas, and that's all you have to say. Whereas everyone else is saying that they're the little town that they're from. Like I'm from Santa Fe. Everyone knows where that is, but But when you're from Texas, you don't have to say what part of Texas. You're just from Texas.
Amen. So uh, let's talk about Well of Deception. And I love the story that you started with, and I've read your blog post on it. But could you tell us what the story was and why were you so drawn to it?
Um, First, let me tell you, I heard the story. I was working on the Helotes. I'm like the historian of my small town that I live in, Helotes, and I was going around interviewing people, and someone told me, you need to go to the Helotes Country Club. You need to go to Lester's place. Lester's been here a long time, and he knows a lot of great stories. So he owned the local bar. It's called the Helotes Country Club, but it's a Texas country club, if you know what I'm talking about. There's a boar head on the window. So I walked in there and I asked for Lester, and there was a lot of people there. And it's and he said, so I told him who I was. I said, I'm working on a book on Helotes, and I was just wondering. Everyone told me to talk to you. Do you have any stories for me? And he looks at me and he goes, I sure do. And he pulls out a newspaper article. It was very yellow. And then he points to a rifle that was hanging on the wall. And he says, see that rifle up there? I said, yeah. And he says, that was involved in a murder. And I said, oh, really? He says, yeah. And I got it. And he says, a guy who did it was my cousin. And I said, oh, really? And then he showed me the article, and the article was a front page article from 1958 of this murder. And it was stayed in the paper for many weeks, actually, because the murderer got escaped and no one knew where he went. And of course, he was a suspected murderer. They didn't know for sure, but they were pretty clear that this is the guy who did it. But the story was so interesting to me because the woman that was killed, if this man was the real killer, was not only his sister-in-law, but she was also related to him by blood. She was his cousin. And so I thought, wow. And they lived on adjacent farms. She was a turkey breeder, and she was feeding her turkeys that morning and was sniper shot and killed instantly. And so that was the story. And then I started doing research. I was going to originally write nonfiction, and I was doing research on it. And for about a year, I interviewed a lot of the people that were peripherally involved, because all the people who were involved for sure, the couples, they were dead and they had no descendants. So I had to interview cousins and extended relatives and that kind of thing. But I started realizing, I found out that there were not only this murder occurred, but there were accidental deaths, there were suicides, um, there were insanity in this family. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is like stuff of fiction. And that's how it all started. When I began doing the research on the real families, I decided at some point that I needed to write it as fiction because it was just too crazy.
Uh, I, I often tell stories about a business world I play in, and people look at me and say, "You made that up." And it's like, no, no, this was on the record and actually an enforcement action. No, you made that up. So I just love it when fact is not perceived as real enough. You have to make it fiction so people will suspend belief and believe it. I love to talk to writers about their writing process. So, so I'm in the middle of a big project, and my process is to get up at 4 and I write for 3 hours every morning. Because I'm really a morning person, and that's the only place I can carve out that kind of time. Um, and it's I don't want to say stream of consciousness, but it's all in my head. Just report it, and that's a work of nonfiction. Uh, but what's your process? Do you plan it out? Do you plot everything? Do you chapter by chapter? Do you have a muse? Does just the spirit move you? What's the Cynthia process?
Well, if you're talking about fiction, I don't outline. I've written, this is my third novel, and I do have a young adult, or I guess middle grade reader mystery that I wrote, which is fiction. But this is my third adult fiction account, and I don't outline. The only thing that I do, as far as, it's because all of my fiction actually is based on true events. So what I do is I change the names of all of the characters, and sometimes, and I have actually changed the, or created a fictional county or a fictional town, and then and fictional names and all of that. But the background, the backbone of the book are the events that actually happened, and I fit the characters into the events of those. Like in this particular case, the murder search for the killer lasted for 4 years, almost 4 years. So the timeline is that, but it also flashbacks to earlier times in their lives, setting up the whole thing of how this all occurred. This particular book goes back to the Prohibition era, and the Great Depression, World War II. And of course, the biggest impetus of this was the drought of the 1950s, which was a very big deal. And it went on for 7 years, and a lot of farms, were decimated because of it. So the whole eras that I wrote through were already dramatic, as you can imagine. So and so my characters lived through all that, and I was able to, again, remember, a lot of this is based on stories too that the people told me who lived during those times. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
How are you able to get your readers so emotionally involved in all your characters, whether they be the protagonist or, if I can use the word, antagonist?
Wow, that's a good question. Through dialogue, through sensual, um, because you do want to have your characters be sympathetic to it. That I don't know. There's these techniques that you use as a writer. Um, you give a little bit of their thoughts, their thought process, and then once you do that, then you understand that people are basically the same. We all have the same kind of feelings, whether they're anger or love, or passion, and those kinds of things. I really do like to use dialect, the Texas dialect from these time periods. Remember, my characters are from a farming agricultural background. These particular characters are all German background. And I know, living out here, we have a lot of German heritage individuals and people, and also Hispanics, a lot of Mexican descendants. But this particular family, they were all German. And so I've come to know, because I guess I did this history of the town. I interviewed over 100 descendants of a lot of the pioneers out here, and I began to hear their stories and also the way that they speak. And so I use that a lot. So how do you get someone to be emotionally involved? God, there's so many fictional techniques that you use. Um, it's kind of hard to pinpoint what it is.
How are you able to use the story to talk about broader themes like justice, truth, community, and even family?
One of the things that, and again, when you're writing in an organic fashion, you don't understand the themes. I mean, I didn't set out for a theme. It just, but looking back at it, I'm realizing that, for example, family, a blood is thicker than water kind of thing. If you don't want to tell on your family member, even to law enforcement. But the other thing too is, in this particular community, it's a small community, so the law enforcement, the sheriffs, the deputies, the police, they probably would be your neighbors, so you would know who they are, and you would have had some contact with them. So, I mean, those of in this particular family, they did. And so there's that that part of it where you don't want to give up your family member, um, but yet justice needs to be done, and so the story continues on. And like for example, my sheriff, who knows all these families, um, and understands that sometimes people do bad things. Good people do bad things, is basically the attitude.
Let me ask you about the the publishing process and working with Stony Creek. What was that like for you?
Fantastic. I will tell you that Lauren, and his crew are the best. I've been published by other small presses, and they've been very good. But he has the thing. One of the reasons I decided to go with Stony Creek was because he himself is a writer. He's a very good writer, and he worked for Texas Monthly, and I do enjoy reading Texas Monthly, especially their crime stories. But I like the fact that he had written, he was a writer, he had written his own novel, then he started this for other authors. But the other thing too is so he understands that. And he's written nonfiction and fiction, and so he had the same sensibility that I did at how difficult it is sometimes to transcend from going from nonfiction to fiction. So, like I said, they're two different things. But also, he has a great marketing team, and I've not had that before. I mean, my other publishers did have a small little group, but they didn't. They had so many authors that they didn't really do very much for them. But this time we have a really good crew that's really helping us get the word out about our books, and I really appreciate that.
I'd like to turn to your blog, Type M for Murder, and ask you about that because I was intrigued by that. First of all, congratulations for being top mystery blog winner previously, and one of the top 100 best creative writing blogs. But your post on Well of Deception and suspension of disbelief, but also your work, maybe work is not the right word, but your attendance at the medical examiners conference on medical death investigation. How did that all work together in a process or the process for you in writing um, the book?
Well, I have a critique group, or I had one at the time, who I would send them my work, and then we would meet and discuss it. And that particular scene, there's a scene there where one of the characters, um, she commits suicide, and this is based on an actual suicide, a true story. And she shot herself with a rifle 3 times, and they found her in a bathroom. And I actually used there was a newspaper clipping, there was a death certificate, and I kind of used those to set up the scene. And my critique group was just, they didn't believe it. They just balked at it. They said, no, there's no way this small woman is killing herself with a 2020 rifle. And somebody planted it between her legs there. That, it's not a true story. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I gonna how am I gonna do this? So then I started questioning even the death certificate, which actually said that she had been shot 3 times and where she had been shot. And and then I found out that they were having this medical examiners convention for 2 days, and I called the medical examiner's office in and this was in Bear County, and I asked if I could come, and they said sure. I told them what I was doing, that I was a writer, and I just needed to get some information, and they said sure. So I went to it, and there was many prominent medical examiners, including Dr. DeMaio, who was a very famous gunshot specialist and pathologist, Vincent DeMaio, by the way. And so he was there, and he gave a talk about gunshot wounds and on that kind of thing. So so after he gave his thing, that I think it was right before lunch, the sessions had ended, and I went and I asked him. I basically interviewed him, and told him the story about this woman, And I said, "Is that something that could have happened?" And he goes, "Oh, yes, absolutely." And then he said, "I had a case once where a man using a gun, like some kind of just a small gun, uh, shot himself 14 times before he died." And I was kind of astonished. And he says, "Oh, no, no, these things, they're not as rare as you think. They're uncommon, but not rare," is what he told me. And I said, "Okay, well then this definitely could have happened." He goes, "Oh yes, absolutely." But I still had the problem that the only people who would know that was someone in forensics, or a law enforcement person. A normal reader who would be reading something like that would go, "Well, this is crazy. Of course she was murdered." And in fact, the whole family believed that she was murdered based on that. So I actually used all that in the story.
You've got a couple of other blogs by other authors at Stony Creek, Paul Rimmer on his Island Intern and Teddy Jones. And I've had the opportunity to interview both of those delightful writers, delightful people. And I just wanted to acknowledge you for writing blogs about their books. That I thought that was great that you're giving back to the community and to Stony Creek, other Stony Creek authors. Um, can I ask you, do you have any projects either in mind or in progress?
Yes, yes, I do. I'm actually working on another nonfiction book. This one's going to be, I guess, a big one. It is a, it's a story I heard when I was working on Death of a Texas Ranger, my book that came out in 2014. And there was two brothers that were in this Texas Ranger troop. They were the Van Ripers, James Van Riper and his brother William. And then I found out, I did a little research. I was doing research on all of the Rangers in this troop so I could put some information in the book. And I found out that James was became a San Antonio police officer and police chief of San Antonio in 1901. And then he unfortunately died not too long into his term, but then both of his sons became police chiefs shortly thereafter. And I thought that was very interesting. But this entire family, they're a Dutch family. They came to San Antonio via they were from the New York area, went to the gold rush, and then ended up in San Antonio. But there was 9 siblings in this family, and 5 of them were in law enforcement in Texas. They were Texas Rangers. They were Border Patrol agents. They were U.S. Deputy Marshals. They were involved in all of the most interesting cases or famous cases in Texas of getting criminals. And but their sisters also had interesting stories, and one of them ended up in an insane asylum. So I decided I'm going to write this book, and I've been doing research for the last 2.5 years, and I'm finally getting ready to start writing the book. So that's what I'm working on. And the tentative title is Saints and Sinners, the Van Ripers, Keepers of, and Renegades of the Law.
Well, I'm going to look forward to that one. Cynthia, unfortunately, are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you, to find out more about you and, of course, your books, and where it would be the best place or places for them to go, and when will Well of Deception be released?
Certainly. My website is a really good place to start, cynthialealmassey.com. It has all kinds of information. My biography has all my books on it. But also you can go to Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Also, the Texas Book Consortium, I have my books. But my book is going to be released October 7th. And so you can actually go online and pre-order the book now, so that you can get it by October 7th.
Well, Cynthia, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me, and I hope we can continue this conversation, and I hope I can catch up with you at one of your events this fall.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.